Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Johnson. I'm Skyline Properties designated broker, and I'm here today with Melissa Helen. Melissa, introduce
Yep.
yourself.
Hi there, I'm Melissa Helland. I'm Assistant Branch Manager in the Bellevue office.
Awesome. All right. So today we're going to be talking about talking to your seller about offering buyer brokerage compensation in your listing agreement. So the listing agreement is changing as of August 17th, 2024. If you look at this form in front of you, it says exclusive sale and listing agreement. Over there to the left side, it says Rev 824. Make sure you're using this form going forward, okay? Especially from August 17th forward. And it will be the only version that's available to you on the Northwest MLS as of August 17th as well. So let's move directly into section number 7, compensation. The seller acknowledges that there are no standard compensation rates, and the compensation in this agreement is fully negotiable and not set by law. That's adjusting to the NAR lawsuit, that, yeah, there is no standard compensation. There is, the seller does not have to pay a penny, okay? If during the listing term, the seller sells the property and the sale closes, or the sale fails to close due to the seller's breach of terms of the purchase and sale agreement, the seller shall pay compensation as follows. We go to A, and this is all about the listing side. That's you, the listing broker. And you'll put in a percentage there. Most of our brokers are getting, most of them are in the 2 to 2.5 range lately. We see a few in 3 or even higher. But it's fully negotiable. I want you to know that whatever you and the seller can agree upon that you will receive for listing their home and selling it successfully, that's the amount you'd put in here. You could put in a flat fee if you wanted to. I've seen some brokers do that, like $3,000 or $5,000 flat fee. And other would be maybe a blend of things, something like that. So that can get a little more complex. Talk to your manager if you think that your seller wants to do something in terms of other. But let's move on to 7A2. If the buyer is not represented by a buyer brokerage firm, the listing firm compensation shall be blank percentage of the sales price or dollars and other equal to the amount in subsection 7A1 above if not filled in. So let's talk about that. So say you were offering, say that you, because it's going to take you a little more work, you're going to be asking the seller for a little more. Go ahead, Melissa, you had a question?
Yeah, if the buyer's not represented, basically, I just want to make sure I understand this. You, as my listing broker, is now the buyer, you're going to be assisting an unrepresented buyer in, so the compensation there, it would say you want 1% more because you're going to be doing more work for me as for this unrepresented buyer. That amount would be 2.5 plus the extra 1%. So you want to see 3.5 in that section, line 50, where the percentage is.
Yeah, correct. So say because it's of the extra work, you're gonna you would like to receive a little more, maybe 1% more than you were getting for just doing the listing. You're absolutely correct there. So you'd put in another, instead of putting 1% on line 50, you would put 3.5% on line 50 if you were getting 2.5% on line 49.
Okay.
Okay, so you'd add line 49 to the amount you want to receive, and that's what you'd put on line 50.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's move down to the buyer brokerage compensation, because this is going to be the more challenging conversation these days with your seller. So 7B, buyer brokerage firm compensation. Seller acknowledges that the offering compensation to a cooperating member of the MLS representing the buyer, which is the buyer brokerage firm or the buyer brokerage compensation, is not required. Okay, so your seller needs to know that. There is no law that says they have to pay a buyer broker. It's recommended that they pay a buyer broker. There's a lot of reasons behind that. The most common one is that buyers are going to be using their liquid funds to pay their own closing costs and their own down payment and things like that. And they don't necessarily have a lot of extra money left over to pay their buyer broker to show them homes. They can build the amount they're going to pay their buyer broker into their mortgage. Buyers are essentially paying this fee because they're the ones paying the price for the home, and they're the ones who are getting the mortgage based on the price of the home, and that price includes the buyer broker compensation. So that's kind of going off into the weeds a little bit here, but long and short of it is that the buyers don't necessarily have the money, and they need the seller to pay the buyer brokerage compensation. And the good news for the seller is that their offer reflects that amount. If the seller is not willing to pay anything, I think sellers could probably anticipate maybe receiving lower offers to make up for that fact. So there's a lot of theoretical things going on there, but these are conversations you're going to want to have with your seller, find out where they're at, see how they feel about offering any compensation. If they are willing to offer some compensation, check the first box here, the seller's offer of compensation. The seller offers buyer brokerage compensation as follows. And you'd put in a percentage there. So say they're offering 2.5%. I use that as an example, but the example is based on the fact that 63% of all listings on the Northwest MLS are 2.5% offering right now. So they're offering 2.5% of the sales price to the buyer brokerage firm, which includes another broker affiliated with the listing firm who represents the buyer. So say I was the listing broker and Melissa was the buyer broker. She is still entitled to that buyer brokerage compensation, even though she is a member of Skyline. It's not a thing where she would be excluded from that because she was part of Skyline. So that part's pretty easy. That's pretty normal. That's what you've been doing pretty much all along. That discussion has been the same one forever. If we go down to 7B2, I want you to just put NA on line 60 in the percentage. We don't do limited dual agency at Skyline. We don't allow it, so you'll never put any kind of an offering there. So let's move down to 7B3. The buyer brokerage compensation shall be paid as set forth above, unless modified by a buyer in a mutually accepted purchase and sale agreement. We're going to do a separate purchase and sale agreement class, one of these videos for you. And we'll be talking about how to do that, but it can be a different offering than what the seller is offering. The offered amount may not be withdrawn or reduced with respect to a buyer after that buyer or the buyer brokerage firm has notified the listing firm or seller of that buyer's intent to submit an offer and for 3 calendar days thereafter. So if you were to call a listing broker and say, hey, I'm going to be turning in an offer tomorrow morning, we're waiting on the pre-approval letter, so we're going to send you an offer tomorrow morning. They can't turn around and change what is on the MLS under that seller's offer of compensation in the meantime and force you to abide by that. Say they reduced it. You can count on it to be what it is for at least 3 days. They have to notify you if you say you've shown the home and you haven't written an offer yet, and the compensation is going to be changed. My recommendation is that you contact all the brokers who have shown the home to let them know that it's changed, and then go ahead and make the change as well. The buyer brokerage firm is an intended third-party beneficiary of this agreement. In other words, the buyer brokerage firm is basically part of this contract because the seller is agreeing to this contract. And then finally on 7B4, if checked, the offer to pay buyer brokerage compensation shall extend to licensed brokerage firms that are not members of the MLS. So that would be, these would need to be Washington firms. They're licensed in Washington. But they could be, say Vancouver is the RMLS. Well, they're not a member of RMLS, so they're not guaranteed to be paid. But if you check this box, then they are guaranteed to be paid by our seller. Same thing with Spokane. They've got the SMLS. We've got the There's a lot of them out there. There's Ole Pen, which is Olympic Peninsula, and Yakima, and there's some others. So anyway, by checking this box, which I do recommend, you are offering that same compensation to any Washington licensed broker, no matter what MLS they're a member of. Melissa, any questions on that section?
No, I think you've covered that well.
Okay, so here's where we get into something new. So in the past, you've been used to seeing on a listing where it would say a percentage. It could be 0, it could be 2.5, it could be 3. Sometimes it'll just say a dollar amount for the amount of SOC, that was the selling office commission, which got changed to BBC, the buyer brokerage compensation. But now you're going to see some other things. If you don't see a number, you could see request in offer, or you could see none. Well, the next 2 sections cover that. So if you check box number, the second box instead of the first box, that's the buyer to request compensation in offer. This is most likely going to occur because the listing broker is a NAR member, and under NAR's settlement, the brokers who are realtor brokerages are not allowed to publish the buyer brokerage compensation in their listings. So in that case, a seller may be, hey, I would love to offer 2.5% to any buyer broker who comes through. That broker is not allowed by their firm to publish it. Then what would happen is the seller would check the second box. That's the buyer to request compensation and offer. In lieu of offering a specific compensation amount, the seller invites the buyer to include in the buyer's offer the amount that the buyer requests seller to compensate the buyer brokerage firm, which amount must be agreed to by all parties. Request in offer will be displayed in the compensation section of this listing. So you'll want to watch our video on the purchase and sale agreement and how that language has changed a little bit. So that you can see this in action, how this is going to look, okay? But if the seller is willing to offer 2.5%, but maybe they'd like to see if an offer would come in for less, or maybe their broker is not allowed to publish the compensation, then this is the box they would check.
Okay.
Questions on that, Melissa?
Yeah, so we're gonna see some, sometimes we're gonna see the SOC be a percentage, and sometimes we're gonna be seeing request and offer.
Correct. That's
Okay.
correct. And if you see request and offer, I would immediately pick up the phone and talk to the listing broker. And I would ask them a question. Hey, what's the seller got in mind? How much do you think they're willing to pay?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you kind of get into negotiations with the listing broker, to try to identify what the seller may be paying or may be comfortable paying as a buyer broker compensation.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a good way to do it. Personally, I don't want my buyer's offer to suffer, maybe be countered because I'm asking for too much commission. So if I know upfront how much they're willing to pay, then I can make that offer cleaner that way. If we're doing an aggressive offer where we want it to get accepted, let's not give the seller a reason to counter us just because of how much I'm receiving.
Sure.
All right, now moving on to 7B, third box, and that is no offer of compensation. So the seller does have the option of not offering anything to the buyer broker. The seller declines to offer and does not intend to pay buyer brokerage compensation. The seller acknowledges that a buyer may still submit an offer that includes an amount that the buyer requests seller to compensate the buyer brokerage firm. None will be displayed in the compensation section of the listing. Okay, so a seller can put none, and a buyer still has the right to make it in their offer. Okay, so if they need their broker, the buyer broker, to be paid by the seller, they may make an offer anyway, and then it's up to the seller to choose that. But by putting none on the listing, the seller's making a statement of, I really don't want to offer any compensation. Yeah, it's different. So
Yeah,
we'll
it
see
is
if,
different. So we're gonna be either seeing a percentage of commission, request an offer, or none, all displayed on different listings.
yeah, different listings are going to say different things, correct.
Okay.
One of the upsides working for Skyline is we are not in our members, we are not required to hide the amount of buyer brokerage compensation that our seller is willing to offer. If the seller is willing, you can publish it, and that's going to make your listings stand out. Um, it's a phone call that the buyer brokerage doesn't have to make. Hey, how much are you offering? You know, or how much is the seller offering on that one? They don't even have to call you on that. Hopefully they're calling you about some other things, because a good broker should always call the listing broker. But that said, that doesn't have to be part of the discussion. You're offering 2.5%. The buyer broker is good with that. The buyer is good with that. There's no question mark. It's when it says request an offer that suddenly negotiations can come up. And when it says none, it can be even more intense negotiations.
Okay.
Okay, so the rest of this section on compensation talks about the timing and what happens if you cancel, things like that. We're not going to dig into that for this one. I really want to talk about just the compensation theory itself. So hopefully that answers any questions. Melissa, any final thoughts or questions?
No, I think you went over it well, and I haven't, I think if I was representing a seller, I would really try to encourage them to offer compensation.
I'm with you. I think it's still the best practice.
Yeah.
So I think it's the one that is going to help the seller get the most money, help the seller get the most offers,
Mhm.
because there are buyers that will make a deliberate choice not to see homes that are offering no compensation
Mhm.
because they can't afford to pay the compensation.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Melissa, and thank you all for watching. We've got a couple other videos that will be upcoming, having to do with the purchase and sale agreement, and also with the buyer brokerage services agreement form 41.